I want to reintroduce myself. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. My name is Gary Mars. I am serving as association counsel. I'm going to ask for the following. I'm going to give you a lot of information. I'm going to ask you, I know it's going to be difficult, but I'm going to ask everybody to please let me get through my presentation, and then I'm going to answer whatever questions you guys have. The only reason is because as I'm explaining, if you interrupt me, and I don't mean to offend anybody, I'm going to give everyone the opportunity to speak, but if you interrupt me as I start or before I complete, I probably will answer most of your questions if you just give me maybe 5 minutes. I know that's a lot, but 5 minutes just to speak, and I'm going to give you the most current update as of this morning regarding the elections.
Gary?
Yes.
So
and I didn't even make the beginning before I got interrupted.
No.
Yes, Sandra.
I was waiting for the right time. I really want us to recognize also a resident and someone who's here tonight who's the mayor of the city of Doral, J.C. Bermudez. Thank you for coming. I know you've been very up to speed onto what's going on. So before you sneak out on us, I wanted to welcome you and thank you for coming, J.C.
The good news is I only see J.C. Bermudez as the original president of this association. So, okay. So let me get started. And I hope everybody understands my instructions or my requests. But I'm going to ask one other thing. Can everybody please keep it down just a moment? Because I don't want anybody not to be able to hear what I'm saying. Okay. So, the elections were scheduled for a combined 2-day affair. September 12th was the first day when you could register, and that mostly was involving the ability to bring large amounts of proxies onto the property. If everybody understands that this association, you all know you can vote in person, or you can give your vote to another person versus using a general proxy. So in past years, and I do want to explain to you all, although some of you may not recognize me, I used to be a lot younger when I was here a long time ago, and so was JC. But I was here for many years at the inception of the association, and I've run many elections in this room, so I understand how they work. There was a period of multiple years I wasn't doing your elections. This is the first year I started doing elections again for you all. And the way that the board defined the elections was it was going to be a joint effort between my law firm, the Siegfried Rivera law firm, and the Cuevas law firm. So there were 2 attorneys present from both law firms, 2 female attorneys from my office, 2 male attorneys from the Cuevas office. On the 12th, the idea is that anybody that had more than 5 proxies in their name were to register, and that on the 13th was going to be people who had 5 or less proxies would register, and during the course of both days, there was also an ability to register yourself. On the first day, which was September 12th, 997 proxies were brought into this property with 11 proxy holders. 900, almost 1,000 proxies came in with 11 people's names serving as the proxy holders. On September 13th, there were 181 proxies from 46 proxy holders that could have been individuals or up to people that had only 5 people in their name. There were 181 of those people. So the total proxy count was 1,178 proxies. I'm just letting you know that is a gigantic amount of proxies. I represent properties bigger than this. They do not see anything close to that. Not that that means anything, other than there were a lot of proxies that had to be validated and observed. Our commitment to the association, both law firms, was that we were both going to be involved in the process. We were both going to validate collectively as a unit, even though we're 2 possibly competing law firms. I mean, we both do the same kind of work. But we worked together, and to the credit of the board, the efforts between the 2 law firms were without issue. We worked very well together. There were no concerns or issues with regard to our cooperation with each other. My compliments to the Cuevas group. My attorneys also, I think, did a fantastic job. That said, so at the meeting, when all of you were here, the issue that first arose was the following. When we were here on the 13th, one of the original issues that was presented was that there were people that arrived that wanted to vote themselves. And as they went up to vote and register their name, it was determined that they had proxies that were already submitted in their name. 10 of those people indicated that they had never voted. They had never submitted a proxy in somebody's name. They only were registering themselves, and they had no concept that they had given their name to anybody else. That immediately raised a concern from my attorneys, principally, and then the Cuevas group that was shared with. And as a result of that, we started to do a much more fine-tuned evaluation or critical evaluation of the materials. So what happened was, following that, is that we identified through the course of quick evaluation that this issue existed. And we also had a first start, I should never have gone off script, but we started immediately trying to validate the proxies that came in first to see how many of them were either duplicates, or for example, it was submitted under the name of a Mr. Smith, but the house was really owned by a Mr. Jones. Normal, ordinary operational issues that come up always in associations of this size. There were 407 of the 1,178 proxies which we set aside that we deemed to have had some issue. Not anything necessarily critical, but some issue. Again, it could have been submitted without a signature, it could have been put in with the wrong name. Some issue came in with regard to 407 that were essentially set aside. Of the 407, we proceeded on those days, but mostly on the days following, and they were disqualified for those reasons. So 407 of the 1,178 were disqualified for those reasons. Of the 407, 212, or over half of the 407, were disqualified because there were multiple proxies submitted for the single resident. So what I mean by that is, for example, if a unit owner, Smith, I'm making up a name, owned a unit, there may have been a proxy that was submitted in one name or the same name on September 8th, I'm just using these dates, September 10th, and September 12th. So the way it works is by law, and it's Florida statute, if you want to know, it's 720-306 is the statute. The statute says you accept the last one in, because you're allowed to revoke your proxy. So if Mr. Smith decides to give his proxy to Ms. Gonzalez and then 3 days later decides to give it to Mr. Goldberg, he's allowed to do that. The last one is the one that you count in accordance to this statute because you're allowed to revoke your proxy. So we determined from those numbers again that 212 of the 407 were repeats. I want to emphasize something. When you were all here on the 13th, we couldn't process, the 4 attorneys, being here 2 solid days. The first day they didn't leave until 1 in the morning. The second day they were obviously here with you all, I think until about midnight. We could not process 407 proxies. Why? Because I don't want to say ever, but the amount, typically the processing of disqualified proxies or questionable proxies is a very small number of proxies. Brian does a lot of very large communities also. To have 407 questionable proxies is really unheard of. And to do it correctly, which means to compare it against the documents that we maintain, the rosters, voting certificates, previous year's proxies, is a very, very time-consuming exercise. We did not expect, nor has your history ever presented anything close to 407 disqualified proxies or questionable proxies. It just is beyond belief, that number. It's a very, very, very high number, and unless we had teams of people sitting here to do that, it was never going to get done. So the first course of action that we took as both law firms after we left here, which is what we told you we were going to do, is the 2 law firms came together and they went through those 407 and they disqualified them. So let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so on the days following September 13th, we disqualified the 407, and in addition to that 407, in that 407, we identified 184 proxies which required an evaluation by an expert. And I'm going to explain to you why visually I'm going to try to do that. So what I mean by that is the following. as we were going through the proxies, and really because we were tripped by those 10 unit owners who came in and said, what happened? I'm voting myself, and we said to them, well, you submitted a proxy or 2 or 3, and they said, I never signed a proxy. Our level of scrutiny became much higher. And I have to be frank with you, the board, as a collective unit, not one of them, all of them, said to us in conference calls leading up to the annual meeting, you must make sure that you do not allow any false proxies to come in. We have got to make sure that this possibility stops. Can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. Okay. So what happened was, I want to tell you what happened as the standard with regard to these 184 or so proxies. So what happened was as we started to evaluate, and I'm talking about as the lawyers, as we started to evaluate the proxies, and I don't mean to give you my back, I'll show you this also. Let me start with the unit owners. We would get a proxy, and the proxy would look something like this. I don't know if you could see it. I tried to illustrate it. I didn't make a large document, but I'll explain what I'm saying here. On the top of the page, you can see, and I tried just to make, this is just a sample. I'm just trying to give you an illustration of what we saw. The top of the page is in one type, and if you can see, the bottom of the page is in a completely different type. You see how just the fonts are different, the documents don't line up. There's, sometimes we had things were just off center. It was just a very, very strange looking document. And more importantly, it wasn't the document that we created for the annual meeting. We created a proxy for you all that went out with your package. This document was not what it looked like. So then we started looking at it more carefully. What we realized was a portion of it, let me get to my papers here. A portion of it was from a version of the document which was modified. Somebody had created potentially a separate proxy, a new proxy, which is allowed. There's nothing necessarily illegal with that. But what happened was that document was in one font, and then oddly, there would be another document that was attached to it. And when we started looking, in other words, cut and pasted, to use a term, if you understand what I'm saying. So when we started looking at these documents, when we really started evaluating it, and we looked at the document, we recognized that what appears to have happened is that there was a cut and paste done. And when we looked at some samples of your 2016 and 2017 proxies that were submitted from prior years, it looked to us as lawyers, and we're not experts, that there may have been somebody who cut and pasted and possibly, or people, and that they changed the dates from a previous proxy and adding in a 2018 date, which would make the document an illegal document. As a basic principle, proxies are only good for 90 days. This concept is completely inappropriate, but I'm just telling you the law only allows a proxy. So if you voted in 2016 with a proxy, and you did that on October 1st, 90 days thereafter, that proxy's dead. It can't be reused for any reason. So when we started looking into the documents, we saw what we identified as 184 of those proxies, 184 that we were able to visually identify that were in need of an expert, because Gary Mars and my team, and at this point the Cuevas firm had already resigned from the association, so they weren't participating in this, but up until the point where we broke up the proxies, the Cuevas firm and the Mars firm were both working together, and both were in agreement that there were 184 that were, let's call them, suspicious. So what our opinion was to the board was that we needed to hire a document authenticator, somebody who has the skill to look at a document, because I can't do it. And yes, you can make the point, you can look at it and just figure it out, but you know what? We got to get past this. We got to stop this stuff, because I'm going to make a strong comment to you. This is not normal. People have said to me that these things go on. They don't go on. They may go on at certain places. They're not. I do dozens of annual meetings a year. I've been doing this for 27 years. I've never seen this before. So this is not normal, and I'm hoping, and I'm saying this on your behalf, I'm your lawyer. I'm not a board lawyer. I don't represent these people individually. I'm here on behalf of the unit owners. You may think this is a public service announcement. I don't care. If you think that's how it is, that's fine. So when my partner Yvonne was here, I wasn't your attorney 4 years ago, but thank you for missing me. I mean it. I mean, I wasn't your attorney 4 years ago. So what the point is that I'm not rushing. I know you guys want an election. I know you want a new board. I know you people are frustrated. I've heard it. I've gotten comments from all board members. I get emails. I get it. But we've got to change this. And the way we're going to change this is we're going to get through this process, which I'm going to explain to you. And my hope is that the people that voted properly will be able to continue to vote properly, and those that voted irregularly, we'll call it for right now, are going to lose their ability to vote. Those votes are not going to be counted, and we hopefully can get through this election. The easy thing to do, maybe, would be just to call the election and just let's do it all over again. Well, you know what? I feel, and this is a feeling I've explained to the board and to the election committee, we had one meeting, that I don't think it's the right thing just to call the election, because then it gives people that may have been part of this issue an opportunity to redo something that they shouldn't have the opportunity of doing. We've got to change the culture. We've got to change it, and we've got to make sure you're doing things in accordance to the law. That's all I'm trying to get done here. I told you guys not to interrupt me. So, okay. So let me just share this. Where are we in the process? The document authenticator, the expert that we've hired, has been doing a very, very thorough job. We've provided her currently the 184 proxies. They're in 4 batches. They're in 4 batches based upon who the proxy holders are. And of the 184, 120 of the 184 had a control document, meaning we submitted the 2018 proxy and either submitted a 2017 or 16 version, or sometimes both. So what the authenticator's been doing is she has been looking at the old document, comparing it against the new document, and because she's an expert, she's able to say whether or not anything had been borrowed from the old document onto the new document. Are you following what I'm saying? That's the principal role of what she's doing. So I'm letting you know of the control documents that have been submitted, which are about 120 of the 184. She has found in the first basic half that she's gone through already, she's only gone through half, which is a bit of an issue, but it is what it is, that of the half that she's gone through, a very, very, very high, almost entire percentage, I don't want to say 100% absolutely, but very close to 100%, have been deemed to have been modified, meaning that it was a previous proxy was used to create a new proxy for 2018. So the balance of those she can look at, like I can look at it and you can look at. You can tell the fonts are different. That's how we were able to separate them. And so of the balance of the 44, I think it is, no, I'm sorry, 64, her plan is that she feels very comfortable that she can rate the ones that she doesn't have a control document to compare it to, by just looking at it and using her expert eye to be able to say whether it's likely that she can authenticate it or unlikely that she can authenticate it. She will be issuing this week the first report on the first batch of about half of that 184. We will get the report. The goal would be for the committee, now with the committee, it will be the committee, to meet, to let us go through it with you, to introduce to you what we find, and I'm going to use the committee to assist us to determine the balance, because the ones that are part of that 120, if you're following my numbers, she's going to be able to tell us she can't authenticate, so we're disqualifying those. Of the ones that she's going to give us a rating on, which is the balance of the 64, I'm going to use the committee and the rankings, and we're going to go through them, and we're going to determine whether or not the committee's of the opinion, based upon her recommendations, that those should be disqualified. I would tell you that I think we're going to get close maybe not all, but we're probably going to get close to the 184 regarding disqualification. The second report should be coming out within, which hopefully, and the committee work will hopefully be done in the next 2 weeks after that. So when somebody asks me, when do you think? What I think will be the process, so everybody's on the same page, is that once we get through this, which will probably be in around 2 to 3 weeks, I'm being more generous, but I think it's going to be 3 weeks, we will then have an ability, once we then have to take the ones we disqualify, now wrap those back into the previously validated proxies, because some of the proxies that we may have disqualified may become alive again because they're not a problem, they just were duplicates. Once we get through, but there aren't a lot of those. But once we get through that process, my hope is in about 3 weeks or so to renotice the annual meeting. At the annual meeting, it will just be the vote of those proxy holders, because everybody else has already submitted their ballots. We have those under very strict security in my office. So it'll just be it will not be a very long 2-day process. It will be literally an evening and then a calculation of the ballots, and then you'll have a new board. One more thing I want to add, just so everybody's on the right page on this. Some commentary that came up about resignation. Obviously, there were a couple signs that went up that are no longer up, but it's not an option. A corporation in the state of Florida can't operate without a board of directors. It doesn't exist. If you do that, it's called a receivership. And if you think you've spent a lot of money in this process, which you have, this has been a horribly expensive process. But a receivership is multiple times worse, and anybody that's been in a corporation situation that has had to rely on a receiver, which is appointed through a court process, you don't have the need to recall. You're going to have a new board, hopefully within, I'm expecting within a month, you'll have this whole process done. But the biggest issue with having the process done is you will have the records that we have that are falsified. They're part of your election process. They will be able to be reviewed and looked at, and we'll be able to make decisions how we're going to proceed to prevent this from happening. Last comment. As a result of all of this, I've been forced to contact the state attorney's office and the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. They have been contacted. We are on good speaking terms with them. Whatever has had to be. Whatever's had to be done in order to put them on notice has been done. We understand what their position is. It's actually with the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. It's not with the state attorneys. That's who they directed us to deal with. Again, if we get through this process, I'm very hopeful that we will be able to bring in a new board, whoever those people are going to be, and that we'll be able to move forward and hopefully close this chapter and start working towards a better and much more efficient and appropriate Doral Isles, because I know that's what everybody wants.